Hey, CNFers. The CNF podcast, Creative Nonfiction Podcast, is sponsored by Goucher College's Master of Fine Arts in Nonfiction. The Goucher MFA is a 2-year low residency program. Online classes let you learn from anywhere, while on-campus residencies allow you to hone your craft with accomplished mentors who have Pulitzer Prizes and best-selling books to their names. The program boasts a nationwide network of students, faculty, and alumni, which has published 140 books and counting. You'll get opportunities to meet literary agents and learn the ins and outs of the publishing journey. Visit goucher.edu/nonfiction to start your journey now. Take your writing to the next level and go from hopeful to published in Goucher's MFA program for nonfiction. Want another? Here's another. CNF is also brought to you by Bay Path University's MFA in Creative Nonfiction. Discover your story. Bay Path is the first and only university to offer a no residency, fully accredited MFA focusing exclusively on creative nonfiction. Attend full or part-time from anywhere in the world. In the Bay Path MFA, you'll find small online classes and a dynamic and supportive community. You'll master the techniques of good writing from acclaimed authors and editors, learn about publishing and teaching through professional internships, and complete a master's thesis that will form the foundation for your memoir or collection of personal essays. Special elective courses include contemporary women's stories, travel and food writing, family histories, spiritual writing, and an optional week-long summer residency in Ireland, with guest writers including Andre Dubus III, Anne Hood, Mia Gallagher, and others. Start dates in late August and January. Find out more at baypath.edu/MFA. Dude, this podcast is so metal. That's right, CNFers. This is CNF, the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, where I speak to badass artists about the craft of telling true stories. Today's guest is Eric Ducker, a freelance writer and editor who wrote a great profile on Jenny Odell for The Ringer. And she happens to be the author of How to Do Nothing. You might remember her from episode 151 of this very podcast. The link to Eric's story is in the show notes. The two episodes can, in a way, piggyback off each other. I highly recommend them. First, make sure you're subscribing to the show wherever you get your podcasts. And if you are, consider leaving a kind review on Apple Podcasts. My 39th birthday is right around the corner, and I'd love for us to hit 100. I think we're 34 away. So that's a great present if you ask me. You don't even have to put a bow on it. Be sure to follow the show on Twitter at CNFPod, also on Instagram at CNFPod, at Brendan O'Mara, of course. Facebook is Creative Nonfiction Podcast or at CNF Podcast. However you choose to search for it there. Keep the conversation going there. You know what? Just do it. And I'll hop in. I will jump in and give you digital fist bumps. So the other night, I was choosing which chef's table I wanted to watch. I settled on Jung Kwan, a South Korean Buddhist monk who cooks the temple food at her temple. 100% vegan, and not only that, like 100% plants. Appeals to my vegan taste for sure. But that's not the point. I was floored, categorically floored by the entire episode, but especially this little quote. And it's more like a somewhat of a small monologue, if you will. And I want to read it to you. I copied it word for word from the subtitles. It was like that meaningful and that good. So this is what it says. This is her words by me reading it. Creativity and ego cannot go together. If you free yourself from the comparing and jealous mind, your creativity opens up endlessly. Just as water springs from a fountain, creativity springs from every moment. You must not be your own obstacle. You must not be owned by the environment you are in. You must own the environment, the phenomenal world around you. You must be able to freely move in and out of your mind. This is being free. There is no way you can't open up your creativity. There is no ego to speak of. That's my belief. So that's the great Jong Kwan, South Korean Buddhist monk who cooks delicious food at her temple and travels sometime around the world to lecture on vegetarian cooking and really enlighten people. It was pretty special. I mean, let that sink in. How great is that? You should tee that episode up on Netflix. It could change your life. It's also directed by David Gelb, who, as many of you know, is the director of my favorite documentary these days, Jiro Dreams of Sushi, which I've seen like 8 times. Hustling hard to try to get Gelb on this podcast because, especially after seeing that last Chef's Table, because the parallels between the two, you can tell that there's some themes that cross both movies, and you can tell that that's where a lot of his taste lies, and that would be great to talk to him about that. So anyway, this episode's Eric Ducker, and after that wonderful quote, I'm not going to go tear into a riff after that. So let's just settle in for this conversation with Eric Ducker, episode 157. I hope you dig what we made for you. A fun place to start might be like if anybody reads through your back catalog of dozens upon dozens upon dozens of stories, it seems like music is an influential part of your life, given that you've written so extensively about it. So even as a younger person, maybe in middle school or high school, like how important, if it was at all, how important was music to you growing up?
It was pretty huge. I think. I had my father is and was a huge music fan, and he was kind of one of those rare people who didn't kind of just stop listening to new music, once he got out of college, I feel like, even to today, a lot of people's kind of music taste gets stuck after, wherever, like their early to late 20s, whatever they were listening to. He still had those influences from the 60s and 70s and those records that I would listen to with him, but then he would always be listening to new music and kind of want to know about more stuff and new stuff. So, like when I was in middle school, he was buying like Liz Phair albums and, Uncle Tupelo, which were cool bands at the time for a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old to be buying. And then I also had an older brother who was really into music, and he was, this is the 90s. And, he was kind of obsessed with hip hop. And, but yeah, I kind of took it all in. I was listening to all the stuff they liked, all the stuff that I kind of found on my own, alternative rock, indie rock, dance music, kind of bringing it all in. So yeah, it's been a huge part of my life. Yeah. Since probably I was even in elementary school.
Wow. So who were your go-to, starting string bands, so to speak, in the 90s?
In the 90s, well, Beastie Boys were kind of at the top of the list. Outkast from Atlanta were pretty huge. I grew up in Oakland, California, but for some reason, me and my friends really took a liking to Outkast. This was kind of around the time that punk was kind of, I guess I was kind of the alternative revolution kind of started, but when I was really in high school, it was like, obviously being in the Bay Area, there was Green Day and Rancid were huge. But I was also listening to older stuff. I listened to a lot of Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin. Public Enemy was huge for me. I guess the band that really got me into music, I guess the two bands who got me, or groups that got me into music, kind of creating my identity when I was in elementary school, were Guns N' Roses and Public Enemy. So, yeah.
Did you draw any artistic inspiration from those bands that would maybe later inform the writing you do?
I guess I don't really think about it as consciously, but I mean, I think, probably in the Beastie Boys and some of those other groups I mentioned was just kind of a cultural curiosity and not kind of being ultimately concerned with boundaries of genre and style and, kind of listening to music. I mean, it's a little hard to think about in this context or in kind of our present day where, But in the 90s, a lot of music listening was broken up among, along racial lines. White kids listened to supposedly white music, black kids listened to supposedly black music, and that's how music was marketed to them, that's how culture was marketed to them. And I guess from the start I wasn't really interested in that. I wasn't, I was interested in bands that, or artists that didn't kind of always accept those kind of divisions and classifications. So yeah, that includes Beastie Boys, obviously, but also groups like Public Enemy, who were into, rock music and did, were, that's what they were sampling. That's what they were, they saw the power in that music too. So yeah, I think that was a influence, and just kind of being open-minded and digging into stuff and kind of getting into stuff that kind of taking your own kind of peculiar take on things.
Mm. And as you know, becoming a writer and a journalist, it's a special kind of virus that infects you. And so at what point did you become sort of infected by the writer bug?
I don't know if it was ever a clear infection point. My mother is well, when I was growing up, she was a professor at a graduate school. So, even in writing essays and, class assignments, she would help me as an editor and showed me kind of the importance of editing and the importance of, of writing as a communication tool. And so, I remember in elementary school, I had a 5th grade teacher, and, every morning we started with creative writing. Like, that's what we did for the first, I have to imagine it's 15, 20 minutes of class. We would just do creative writing, which was, I think back about, that's a pretty amazing talent, or not talent. It's an amazing gift to give kids, just to express themselves that way, right? Kind of at the start. And, we would go around the room, and if we wanted to read, you could read your pieces, and kids would, a bunch of 10-year-olds kind of workshopping stories. It was pretty cool. So it's just, writing was just always something I did. I guess in high school, I did, but I don't think I was consciously resistant to it, but it wasn't something that was always obvious to me as something I wanted to do. I didn't join the high school newspaper until my junior year. College, I remember I came to college, and I kind of, your freshman year, they have, that first orientation week, they have all these different things, to kind of check out what you can get involved in, and to kind of get kids excited about being in college. And I remember I went to the newspaper kind of open house for incoming freshmen, and I thought seemed pretty miserable the way they were portraying it. I was like, well, I don't want to do this the way you got, it's like a bunch of self-serious seniors being like, we are like dedicated to this, and we're doing, some, like, they were enrolled in school, but not taking any classes and just editing the newspaper. And I'm like, that's pretty ridiculous for just this. So, so I wasn't immediately gravitating towards writing in college. And then, some friends, or I met a guy through a friend who was running a satire magazine. And, I kind of started contributing to that and got involved with that. And I don't know, that was a big part of my college. This is a very long-winded
that's great.
Giving you, yeah. But I did that a lot in college, and I had a major that forced me to write a lot. And then I guess graduation rolled around, and I was like, well, I guess I can write, and I'm interested in things. So maybe I can do this. It was never like a very, like, my wife is also a journalist, and she just says, she was 9 when she knew she wanted to be a journalist. So I think there was never a huge revelation for me that this is what I wanted to do. It just became like, oh, this is something I do, and I seem to be doing it pretty well for kind of the standards of where my level is. So I guess I can keep pursuing it, and it's somehow turned into a career.
Yeah. So as you go, where did you go to college, I should say first?
Oh, I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut.
Okay. So from there, you kind of you had a knack for writing, and you figure, oh well, this might as well make a go of this. So what was the next step at a college? Like, what are you looking at? What are you looking for, and where do you finally land?
Well, so my wife, who was my girlfriend in college, was also a year older than me. So she had a job in journalism in New York. So she had already graduated and was living in New York and working for a newspaper. And, I was graduating. I wanted to live with her. And so I said, well, there's journalism jobs in New York. Music journalism seems to make sense. Let me call up these places and find out if there's music internships. And I guess I was pretty naive about this stuff at the time. So I think I probably called them during my spring break, which is, like March or April, calling up Rolling Stone and Spin, being like, do you guys have internship programs? And, they're like, yeah, they've been filled since December or whatever. I didn't kind of realize that these were these highly coveted positions or kind of opportunities. I was a DJ at my college radio station, WESU, and they would send, labels would send promo music there and whatever. And then, but also, I guess someone had sent the second issue of the Fader magazine to the radio station. It was just kind of sitting in the common area, and I looked at it and I was like, well, this seems interesting. I had never heard of it before. And, I emailed them some general thing being like, are you guys looking for interns? And I guess no one had asked them yet. And they had said, yeah, actually we would love an intern, like send some stuff and, or just like whatever. And I think I mailed them this satire magazine that I edited. And I think there was a kind of a upstart music magazine at the school. And I think I wrote some stuff for that. And I sent it to them and sent them a terrible cover letter. I'm sure I've continued to be terrible at cover letters. And but they said, yeah, I guess no one at the time else wanted to be their intern. So I was the first intern at the Fader in the summer of 2000. And I started working on, I guess by that time they were working on the 5th issue. So I started as an intern there, and I worked there for that summer, and kind of then my internship ended, and I was like, well, I don't know what's going to happen now. And then they said, at the time the Fader was tiny. It was literally one person it was their full-time job. There were several people who worked on it, but there was only one person that was his job, was to work on the Fader, and they had a little bit more money, and they were able to hire 2 more people, and they offered me a job to start working on it. And so they said, we can't offer you a lot of money, but do you want to be the senior editor of the Fader? And I said, well, that's a ridiculous title because I'm 22, but okay, I guess I'll do that. And so, yeah, that's where I started. And I ended up working for the Fader for almost a decade.
Wow. So you hook up there. What becomes your relationship to ambition in this line of work, and maybe who were you reading at the time that stoked your ambitious flame, so to speak?
I guess ambition.
Like, were you maybe I know, like like maybe you were reading a Chuck Klosterman or something. You're like, oh, the way he's doing this, like I'd like to get to that level or something. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I was, I think coming in on the ground floor on a project like the Fader, when I did, and kind of, everything was up in the air. It could be whatever we wanted it to be. So I guess my ambition was to be part of this magazine and kind of see what we could do and what I could do with it. I wasn't there. I should say, I was kind of always interested in being an editor. That was kind of what I enjoyed the most doing. By necessity, I had to write a lot because we didn't have much money to pay other people. Like, we ended up, writing the staff of the Fader ended up writing the majority of the book. The editors wrote it for the most part. I think the guys who are kind of older than me who were involved in it, they were, I don't want to say dismissive, but they were kind of uninterested in tapping into the established music journalist, kind of the community. I think they were like, well, let's do our own stuff. Let's kind of pick non-traditional writers. Let's kind of go about this as a non-traditional way. I mean, it's hard to think about it now because everything, publication wise, it's so, web, forward now, kind of internet forward. But, the thing was, we made a magazine that was our focus. And kind of at the time, Fader was really known for being one of the kind of visually impressive magazines. The photography was great. The design was cool. So, there was also kind of a feeling like people weren't like checking it necessarily for the articles at the time. So we felt like we had a little bit of a freedom to do whatever we wanted, which means kind of pushing the boundaries, or I don't know, that sounds a little bit more self-congratulatory than I intended to, but just kind of trying weird shit, I think, is more kind of where our thoughts were. So, Knox Robinson, he was the editor at large at the time. He's kind of largely stopped writing for publications. He does some other very interesting stuff. He was influence in terms of, saying like, kind of redefining of what I thought a traditional, or redefining what a music profile could be or should be. And, he was doing, some experiments that were pretty far out, like just writing a short story when it was supposed to be, a 400-word article about an R&B singer that didn't even really mention the R&B singer, or, he did more reported stuff, and, he would go out to Detroit and talk to the White Stripes and whatever. But, just kind of not kind of going about it the way everyone else was going about it. The book that we passed around a lot within the office was The New Journalism, which is the compilation put together by Tom Wolfe that had a lot of people. I mean, it has all sorts, I think there's a Joan Didion piece in there. I think there's Terry Southern, this kind of, I had read, I think, a little bit of Joan Didion in college, and maybe some, I think there was some Hunter S. Thompson and stuff, but, so it's just like, well, can we kind of bring, this is obviously very high-minded for a glossy magazine that most people are looking for, pictures of rappers and rock bands at, but it was like, can't we try to do something a little far out or weird or different than everyone else is doing?
And the fact that you wanted to be an editor over being a writer, that's a special kind of brain to want to, be an editor, say, versus a writer. And what was it maybe about being an editor that appealed to you more on the outset?
Well, writing's really hard, and it's always will be, always has been. Editing isn't as hard. I mean, I guess, there's obviously a million types of editing. There's, getting into the nitty gritty of the story and kind of, or also the larger thinking about the story. And then there's actually finding stories and figuring out stories. And I don't know, I think editing, I think and this is true in my writing and my editing, I think what I'm really interested in is kind of finding the threads and the patterns and everything, and kind of figuring how it all works, and what it's saying about culture, and what it's saying about our world, and kind of what everything reveals, and how things, what's new, what's not new, what's interconnected, what's an entirely different thing. And I think, editing just like allows you to see more of the world and kind of help you figure out the world a little bit easier. And, it's more collaborative, it can be, helping people realize their thoughts and realize what they think is interesting. And, also editing, there's plenty of, I think kind of what's defined my work over the past 2 decades or so is just a curiosity and a great amount of things. I'm not one of those writers who has an obsession or a singular obsession or some subject that they want to keep exploring over and over again. I'd rather have an article, I'd rather learn a ton while writing an article and researching an article. So I think, as an editor, you get to learn about all sorts of stuff. You get to learn things about that you had no idea you want to learn about. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I think too, with being an editor, a lot of it's like being a really good coach that wants to see their players succeed, and if all the players are succeeding, then the team is succeeding.
Yeah.
And I think that takes a particular kind of mindset too, of a much more unselfish mindset. Just speaking personally, like I gravitate more towards the writing because my ego is tied to that more. Like I want to be sort of on the field.
Hmm.
But I totally get, like, when I talk to editor type people, they're like, nah, I don't. I'd rather, kind of like what you're saying. You have like this real generous mindset of wanting to like spread the love and like realize someone else's vision, and in so doing, that's a big payoff for you as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm not, I don't feel like yes, I'm trying to think about how to say this. Yeah, I think it's cool to help people, and it's cool to it's cool to get ideas out in the world. I think if you had talked to people who I was editing, you know, 10, 15 years ago, like what I would constantly be telling is like, I want to hear more of you in this. I want it this weirder, like let loose. I think, so a lot of the people that we ended up, Fader, our listeners don't know, it's a started as a magazine, it's music and culture magazine, and the focus was on emerging talent and sound. And, we also want to reflect that in the writers we were working with. And, kind of in the mid 2000s, a lot of the people were coming out of blogs and, places where they were developing their own unique voices and their own styles. And that's why people were paying attention to them. And then some, they'd get their first paid gig at a magazine, and, a lot of them would get their voices taken out, or they would feel like they'd have to suppress their voices, or they'd have to kind of tone down who they were, or make their writing more cliche. And I would constantly felt like when they were writing for the Fader, I would constantly be saying like do you? We don't have to fit any house style or prescribed way of talking about things. Like, talk about this how you talk about it on your own web, your own blog. That's why I asked you to do this. I could there's a million straight up music journalists who can turn in the same thing. Like, it's about like feeling comfortable saying what you want to say, and you obviously have a take on this, and that's why I asked you to write this.
Yeah. And with respect to your writing and stuff, like when you're inspired by something, you're like, oh, that's something I want to write about. And then you get going, and of course, as you referenced earlier, writing is hard. That honeymoon period often comes to an end, and then you find yourself in the middle of this nasty shitstorm of a draft that you've started.
Yeah.
So when you get to that ugly middle or messy middle, however you want to call it, how are you processing that part of the writing phase and to power through so you can at least get a lump of something done?
At this stage in my career, if I'm writing about something, I'm going to try to do as much research as possible into it. That's independent research. That's reading what's already been written about it and kind of what's surrounding it, what I'm writing about reminds me of that I want to read about, and then talking to some more people, and finding secondaries and tracking down people who might have a perspective that no one else has talked to about this. And going into the writing process, I feel, I'm most comfortable when I have a lot to draw on, that I've, either through my own original reporting or kind of found other things. So when it's messy, I think it's the best I can do is maybe think about, well, how do I like, what do I know? Like, what can I, you kind of go back to the source material, I guess, is, I think at this stage, that's kind of what I'm interested in doing. I took a writing class in college with a writer named Annie Dillard. Yeah. I mean, actually, I'm not, there were some people in that class who were very big Annie Dillard followers and very I don't want to say acolytes, but very kind of attuned to her, and I wasn't. But she, she had this writing class, and basically the way it would work is met once a week, and she would spend, it was 3 hours, and the first 90 minutes she would just talk, basically, and just kind of tell you things. And it was always kind of weird, like it wasn't like a lecture. She was just like, here's this thing in my head that you should know if you want to be a writer. Here's this other thing that's in my head that you should know if you want to be a writer, and just keep going and going and going. And and then the second half we talk about our stories that we had written for that week. And it was a class about memoir, and kind of the one thing that stuck with me throughout all these years is she once said, you should learn something with your reader should learn something from every sentence that you write. Now, I don't think I achieve that, but it's just, if I feel like I can impart knowledge or something that I learned over, to my readers, I guess that's kind of what I keep going back to. It's just like, okay, like, what am I trying to convey? What's the point of all this? And, if I have time and the inclination, I can hopefully put some of my spin and voice and perspective on that. That makes it a lot more exciting. So it's not just a dump of everything that's in my Google Doc about the subject, but that's kind of how I go about it. I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. Like being able to fall back on your research is a way to. It's an energizing, animating force to the writing process, both in terms of the material you need to push through, but also, and this is just me, like my own, say, anxiety with either a story or even like with. I find if I get nervous or anxious about a podcast or someone I have to talk to for a story I might be writing, oftentimes it's like, oh, Brendan, you haven't do more research. Like, just do a little more legwork. And the more legwork I do, I'm like, oh, this is all right. I feel better now. I feel more equipped to help carry a conversation or nudge it in the right ways. Or I have such a backlog of information that no matter what Eric says or Debbie Millman or Laura Hillenbrand, whatever they say, in a sense, their answers are guiding the conversation because I can ping pong something they've said in the past. And
right.
And it's just like, it's like just do a little more work. If I'm feeling that anxiety build up, it's like, you haven't done enough work yet, so do more work.
Yeah, and it's like, I'll do all my research and I'll print it out and I'll go through it and I'll highlight it and I'll think, I know where the story's going and what needs to be in there. And if I'm stuck, I can go back in there and see things that I'm like, oh wait, no, this part's actually interesting. I kind of forgot about this, or this kind of is a connection between this part and this part that I can use, or oh yeah, remember there was that book that you kind of looked at but didn't really, what was that in that chapter, and kind of go back to that and try to find it, or find something that they say and look back into who that person is that they mentioned. There's always more information to kind of help guide you there.
Yeah, I think that in the piece you did for The Ringer on Jenny Odell in her book, How to Do Nothing, does that particularly well, because not only are you sort of reviewing, like sort of tangentially reviewing her book and also tangentially profiling her, but you're also pulling in like Cal Newport, who is this sort of a digital refugee. He's just not really on the grid in that kind of way, and yet he's a prolific writer and a best-selling author. So you're able to kind of pull that in. So with respect to that, like, how were you able to even like corral him for the story? He's kind of hard to reach.
I'm trying. I want to say I emailed his book publicist who just was like, okay, like he'll do it, and so yeah.
Had you read his latest book? I haven't read his latest one yet.
Digital Minimalism. I had heard. Well, I guess I had heard about it, so I was like, I'm writing this. I pitched that story as, I want to do a story on Jenny Odell. I think, I had read, her piece for the New York Times, and I kind of looked into her. I saw she had this book coming. I got a copy of her book. I thought the book was interesting. I watched some stuff that she had online of her talking. So I pitched that just as kind of a profile on her. My editor at The Ringer said, I want to do something more than just about her. Like, I don't feel like we could just do a profile of her. We kind of I want to, I think in my pitch I had mentioned, she's part of this larger movement about disconnecting and, but that she takes a kind of a different approach to it. And so my editor was like, I want you to kind of talk about and talk to some other people. I mean, I think most likely if it had just been a profile on Jenny Odell, I think I probably would have ended up reading Cal Newport's book anyway, but I wanted to kind of get in, more interviews of other people. So I, along with reading his book, I was able to talk to him as well. Yeah. So it was just like, so it became something bigger and bringing in more voices and kind of having, talking to him, talking to Catherine Price, who wrote this book called, How to Break Up with Your Phone. So these were other kind of experts or kind of people who have become experts in, or at least perspectives in this movement to disconnect from technology. But then, I also talked to, a doctor who's done research in terms of, what the internet does to our brains. And, I talked to some other people, some who made it into the piece and some who did not. But just it couldn't, it was, I think if it was just about Jenny Odell, I probably would have talked to more people about her specifically, talk to other artists, other, maybe contemporaries, and but this was kind of by broadening out the subject, I was able to kind of talk. That's where I kind of got my other sources from.
And did you come to this story because at the moment maybe are you experiencing a conflicted relationship with social media and phone addiction, so to speak?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think most people are. I mean, I think that's a pretty common.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty natural problem for people to have. I think it's it's an anxiety I think we're all dealing with. As I kind of allude a little bit to the piece, I think in the beginning it was a lot of the concern was about what's this doing to our children, what's this doing to our teens, and I think people are starting to really say like, oh wait, what is this doing to me? I am not a prolific social media poster, or I don't tweet a lot. I never have tweeted a lot or put a lot on Facebook, or that's never been my mode for expression. But I think as a curious person, that was a insight for a long time. That was an insight into people's lives and their thoughts and what they were interested in. And yeah, it's compelling. And it became clear after a while that it was limiting productivity, and I didn't feel good on it. And I remember like when I signed up for Twitter, I liked it because I could see what my friends were doing and I could read their jokes, and it was like a fun time. And it long ago stopped being a fun time going on Twitter. And I was like, why am I doing this? And why do I have two children, and why do I sometimes look at my phone when I should be paying more attention to them? Or I mean, it's the same shit everyone's dealing with. It's weird. You go to it's in one sense it's weird. You go to the park with your kids, and you let the kids go play because it's good for them to have independent play, and you look around and all the other parents are looking at their phones, and I'm like, oh, that's gross. But I'm like, well, I'm not necessarily want to talk to these people. I guess, I mean, is it worse if I'm reading a magazine instead of looking at my phone? I mean, I don't know, but it did feel weird to be. Felt increasingly bad the amount of time I was looking at my phone, I guess. And so yeah, I was like, of course it's a concern. It's, as a parent, it's something I talk about with other parents. But yeah, it's so I've been experimenting. I've never done like a fully regimented detox situation, but over the years I've tried to figure out different tips and tools to limit my time on phones and social media.
Yeah, what practices do you have in place to curtail your I'll use just addiction for lack of a better term. But
sure.
So what do you use?
I think we all have this addiction. But
yeah, for sure. So what? So what do you do to curtail that?
Right now, what I have. So on my laptop, which I spend most of my time in front of during the workday or as I work, I guess I've deleted Facebook, which is a pretty basic thing for most people to do. For Twitter, I've now given my wife she's the only person who knows the password to my Twitter account. So like if I ever want to tweet something or even look at stuff, really, like I have to ask her to sign me in, and we don't live in the same place. So I mean, I'm kind of trying to be off Twitter as much as possible. And I guess even when I'm on, I have like one of those, forget what's the Google, I have some, Google Chrome extension. So I'm only allowed to be on Twitter and Instagram through my, laptop for 10 minutes a day. On my phone, I don't have the apps for Twitter or Instagram, and I keep it in black and white, which I guess is the new thing that people do so it's not as exciting, visually appealing. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. It's a constant work and a constant struggle and a constant losing situation. But yeah, I'm trying to limit it as much as possible.
And as the real conflict with it also is, as writers or artists, it's part and parcel to be part of a community. And the more we maybe step back from the ledge of at least the digital community, it's like at one point you need or want to maybe participate in it, to share other people's work, to share your own work. But at the same time, you get sucked into the vortex that has been algorithmically designed to steal your attention. Is that something you're conflicted about, just being in the creative ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, when I have my wife sign in for me, I mean, what it is it's not for me to put a joke up. It's for me to post an article. I mean, I feel a little bit bad that my only social online presence is like self-promotion, but also like that's kind of I feel like the situation I've been forced into. You know what I mean? It's not like it's like, well, they're not doing that much good for me. Like I don't really feel like I owe it to them to give them my my thoughts or my expressions of myself. So I don't know if anyone actually ever sees what I put on social, even when I promote it. But I think I'm a little bit older than a lot of the writers who have found so many opportunities and community through social media. And I think there's just a very micro generational difference. I mean, I've gotten very little work. I guess this is the way I've gotten very little work through social media over the course of the past 10 years. So if I lose that 1 or 2 articles a year because of that, I guess it is what it is. I'll just have to write better pitches, to make up for that, so
yeah.
Am I missing out on the conversation? I mean, if I do, it is, it's, it's like, I think about, when I talked to Cal Newport for the article, he said something that he was like, we kind of bought into this myth that it's become, essential for careers to have this online presence. And he's like, that there's no real proof of that. You know what I mean? Who's promoting that idea that you have to have an online presence if you want to like make it? It's most likely the online content companies, like or the social media companies. They're the ones who are saying, if you want to, you have to have a social presence. If you want to, it's like they've told you that this is essential, and you're like, oh, well, I guess this is essential. It's like, maybe it's not essential, so, or it's not essential for a long-term career or development of abilities,
So how did you end up hooking up with Grantland when they were up and running, and then of course parlaying that into the Ringer, which is kind of like Grantland 2.0?
Yeah, I've been lucky to freelance for both of those outlets. Well, for the Ringer, for Grantland, it started. So Chris Ryan, who's an editor there, worked at the Fader for a while, so I knew him, and so I was able to kind of pitch him stories. I mainly pitched him. I think I kind of when I would write for him, it would be sports stuff, and then at the time so he was running their kind of sports blog stuff, which I think was called the Triangle, and then Mark Lasanti was editing Hollywood Prospectus, which was more their pop culture blog stuff, and I knew him socially just around Los Angeles. Just kind of one of the he had done Defamer and been around for a while and kind of worked at some places. So just they're both just guys I knew kind of professionally and socially that I could start writing for them. And then we came to The Ringer. Chris, was one of the first hires, Bill Simmons' first hires that his core people that he brought over. So I knew him, so I could pitch him stories. I knew Sean Fennessy over the years, who's now was their first editor-in-chief and remains their editor-in-chief. So, just people I have professional relationships and, somewhat social relationships over the years.
Mm-hmm. And how have you gotten, skilled at I will say the science of pitching a story? Maybe before you knew them as well. I'm sure like your pitches now to them are kind of like, hey, I have a couple sentences, like this sounds good. They're like, do you like this? I'd like to do this. And they'd be like, yeah, sounds good. Or nah, maybe not so much. But
Right.
But pitching is a huge, huge part of this game. And if you're going in cold, what's the nature and shape and process by which you write your pitches?
Yeah. I don't know that I've perfected it at all, or I feel like I am constantly falling flat on my pitches. But I think I guess I can tell you what I don't think works that I still do is that I probably overwrite my pitches. My pitches are probably often too long, and I think you want to, as you're saying, now I have relationships with certain editors where I can send them a few sentences being like, hey, I'm thinking about this because of this, and it's pretty cool because of this, and they're like, yeah, that is cool, or they're like, I don't know. But I think my guess, I would recommend getting closer to that for all pitches, I think, than 3 paragraphs, which I sometimes still do, to if I'm going in cold with people. I think you want to show that I think with your pitch, you want to show that you are a considerate thinker and you've thought about the subject and you kind of know what you're doing and you have an outlook and there's people that you want to talk to. Like you've done some of the work already, so you know what's interesting about it, but then you're also making it open-ended enough to the editor that you're pitching, like, I want to learn more. You know what I mean? That it's like there's all this other stuff that can be explored or that might reveal itself in the course of the reporting. You know what I mean? I think editors don't want to feel like you've got, I think, I remember as an editor when someone would pitch me and be like, hey, I talked to this person after the show and I got a really great interview and, I have a 600-word story ready to go. I'd be like, no, thanks. Like this is a collaboration, like if you have this thing all ready to go, I'm not so interested. You know what I mean? I think a lot of editors feel that way. It's like, okay, you've kind of you've sparked my curiosity. Like, what can we come up together that, to make this a cool story that I'll be excited about too, So I think that's my recommendation is to, just have in your pitches to have an exciting idea, show that you have a perspective about it or something that you can bring to it and that there's room for you and your editor to kind of go on this journey together, hopefully, and kind of make something fun and interesting.
So over the course of a typical work week for you, how much of that is divided up into writing columns and stories, and how much of that is idea generation and pitches?
Well, I guess I should say there is no typical work week. I mean, it all depends on where I'm at with my life and things. And
Are you
you know,
kind of
some
like
weeks,
100% freelancer?
yeah, I'm
Oh,
100% freelancer.
okay,
Yeah, yeah.
cool.
This is how I make my money.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I should say, I mean, if I'm deep in a story, like I'll just be working on the story all week, or that it could be a week of interviewing people and researching stuff and transcribing, or and then could be spending days, but like right now I'm kind of in between stories, so I'm generating ideas, writing pitches. That's what I've been doing this week.
So, do you have any kind of daily ritual that you do anchor your day on? Like, even if the work is a bit scattered or you're in different parts of a project, or are there certain things that you hinge your day on? Like, these things have to happen every morning just so I stay sane?
No, I haven't developed anything like that. It's like, I mean, I nothing work wise hinges like that's not like what the anchor of my day is. And it's what anchors my day is like getting my kids breakfast
Mm-hmm.
ready and prepping their lunches. I guess, and figuring out when I have to pick them up and everything like that.
Do you have a way that in the mornings or any time that you kind of check in with yourself, whether that's journaling or meditating, that kind of thing to clear your headspace?
I think probably the closest to that is walking my dog. I walk my
Mm-hmm.
dog for about 45 minutes up in for a while, and yeah, that kind of clears my head a little bit, or kind of I going again with this phone thing. I've been trying to figure out, like, oh, like maybe I go, because I go and I'm listening to music or I'm listening to podcasts as I walk my dog, and that kind of inspires some creativity or thought in my head, hopefully. But I'm thinking, would it be better to be phoneless and just taking in the world around me as I do it, and not have that, when one podcast ends and I'm looking for the next one, not to take those extra, you know, 30 seconds to 2 minutes checking my emails or whatever. So yeah, I think I'm debating that, but yeah, so hopefully, and I'll be walking my dog without headphones in, without a phone, or I'll go back to it somehow, find an old iPad or old iPod that I can use and just listen to music.
Nice. In the last maybe 5 years or so, I think you're kind of in a good sweet spot in your career where you can probably identify this. Like maybe in the last 5 to 10 years, what would you say you're a lot better at today than you were just five or more years ago?
What am I a lot better at?
Yeah, maybe
I think
ways you
about
found to
yeah,
streamline things, or just skill
yeah. I
wise.
think I'm getting better. I used to be a stay up late, write, to write kind of guy, and I think that developed out of necessity. Because as I said, when I started my career, I was an editor, and that's what I did all day. Was during my work day, I wouldn't have time to write. I would be setting up stories and being in meetings and emailing people and doing all sorts of stuff like that, and kind of listening to music, kind of getting things, going to screenings or checking things out. And then there wasn't time to write, so I'd write at night because that's when the emails stopped. And so I kind of got into that habit, and I don't know if that is the most productive way to work. So I think over the last 5 or so years, I've gotten better about like actually writing during the day, which was a huge step for me. I think but yeah, and also kind of tuning out some of those distractions and kind of, focusing like, oh, like you work during the workday and those emails can wait, and you don't have to do all that stuff that you might feel like you have to do.
Mm.
And just like this, the way you're making money is you don't get paid unless you turn in the article, and so you gotta
Yeah.
you gotta spend the time actually writing the article and getting it in. So
What was that transition like between being with Fader for so long and then transitioning to freelancing?
um you know well, I should say there was kind of a there after I left Vader, there was a period of just freelancing, and that it was tough, and it's you kind of figure out, like, you try to think about your friends who have started working at other places, or guys that you met one time, or women that you once emailed with who were like, oh yeah, they have a job and I could probably send them, ideas or so. And so you just kind of go that way. And so it's tough for a while, but then before I kind of went back into freelancing mainly, I did have a job. I guess they're called a creative agency. So doing more like lifestyle marketing work. So I did that for a few years. But yeah, I kind of missed the creative outlet on it. And, there was creative elements to what I was doing and involved with some creative thinking, but in the long run, it's in the service of building some multi-million-dollar company's brand. And so it's not always the most rewarding. And, you don't feel good about putting that up on your Twitter all the time. Like I made this magazine for a car company. So, I got back into freelancing. It was tough. But I had contacts who were working at cool places like, Grantland at the time. And so, yeah, it's okay. It was okay. It kind of, I could find, I had people who were receptive to my ideas, and yeah, it worked out all right. It's always a struggle. It's still a struggle finding editors are incredibly busy, and they don't always have time to write back to story ideas, but it's, you can't just sit around waiting for them to write you back. You got to come up with more ideas.
Right. And in that period of time where, let's say you're working at a place that, wasn't necessarily as creatively fulfilling as you would have hoped, and it probably took a little bit of your soul to show up there all the time.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I was doing good work, and I was working with really smart people at this place. But yes, it was, it was more about, I think it was just the kind of the amount of work that was also a lot frustrating, or just kind of feeling like I was in meetings all the time and not doing enough work. And I was often delegating, I should say I often felt like I was delegating the work that I felt like I would have been more rewarding if I was doing it myself. You know what I mean? Like we were doing cool stuff. It was just like, I didn't get to do it. I just had to kind of figure out who would do the work, which is not as exciting.
And have you, over the course of your career, ever been stricken by those feelings of like competition or jealousy among peers when you're looking over your shoulder at people you admire, even people who are just kind of in your same station, but they feel like they're on some sort of meteoric path, and you're like kind of down here? And did you ever have moments like that? And if you did, how did you process it?
Yeah, of course. I think those are totally normal feelings to have. I think everyone has them. If not, they must have had incredible times with therapy as young children to not have that. Yeah, I mean, you do it. I mean, but also, I've also realized, I guess the way I cope is just like, no one knows everyone's full story, like people who are, I've often found, people who seem like they have it all together are, barely holding it together. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
when you see someone who's writing, story after story that you can't believe, and you're like, oh my God, how are they so productive? How are they so, doing all this? And like, they're probably freaking out all the time. They're making sacrifices that you have to ask yourself, are you willing to make? And there's some sacrifices that, I found like I'm not willing to make. There's things that I'm not willing to forfeit. And, there are people who have decided not to have families because of their jobs. You know what I mean? They've decided not to have friends. They've decided not to see families, to miss things, and it's just like, we're all under different economic realities. We're all under, you don't know what everyone else is dealing with, I guess is my way. It's like all you know is your own reality, and that's what you need to judge yourself against, I would say, is, what works for you and what does not work for you. I guess that's my method of coping.
Right, which is just further amplified by the toxic nature of social media, when it feels like those blow dried outsides are just like, wow, this person's fucking killing it. And then I'm like, God damn it, I can't pay my electric bill or something, you know? In terms of your work, what is still exciting you and bringing you back to the page? What are the things that are like, that are just really stoking your creative flames and keep you, drawing up pitches and, writing great pieces for The Ringer and elsewhere?
I mean, life is continuously interesting. Like, I don't think that I'm the most interesting person in the world. I like there's a lot of writers who are great essayists and bring their selves into everything they do, or that some are good, some are not good, but like that's never been my approach. It's been like, look at me. You know what I mean? Like I can't wait for you guys to think about what I've got to say about this. Like I am happy to learn about so much in this world, like that I do not know about. And life is constantly, there's constantly new things happening and things developing and remutating, and like that I'm just curious about, that I want to know about, that why is it like that? How did that become like that? It's like when I got into music journalism, I would meet people who would be like, oh yeah, I heard that band. Yeah, whatever. They sound like this other band. Or oh yeah, I listened to that. Yeah, I remember that band when it was this band 10 years ago. And I'm like, why the fuck are you doing this if you're just so jaded about this? Right. And like nothing's ever exciting to you? Like if it's not exciting to you, like why do it? So it's just, it's like finding stuff that makes you excited, or be like, oh, I had never thought that they could do this with this, or like I never thought that this thing was going to become a thing again. Like I don't know. Like I want to learn about what music for plants sounds like, and I want to see a documentary about that. It's like there's all sorts of crazy shit out there that you should learn about. Like
getting your like your piece on Odell and the attention economy. Like that seems like your curiosity really comes through in that you're trying to really take a deep dive on what it means to harness or take back our attention in an era where so many entities out there are looking to pirate that.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff out there that I've just been like, oh, I'd never thought about that. I wrote a piece for Vulture, and it was about like that I wrote about like how a band, like if you get a song on Rick and Morty, like how does that affect your life? And it's because like when I was in college, I was really into Blonde Redhead, and they were kind of always like a band that was around, and they kind of maintained, and they would tour every couple of years and put out an album every couple of years. And then one of the creators, Rick and Morty, was like, oh, I like this song for a pivotal moment in this TV show, which for a TV show that has obsessive fans. And it's just like, that changes their, the band was like, yeah, sure, you can use our song. And it like changes the trajectory of their lives or their careers. Like from now on, their most famous song will be a song that was kind of a throwaway song. You know what I mean? It's like, that's really interesting. What does that mean? Like you have a 20 year body of work, and then some guy makes some decision to use your song at this one moment, and it's like, oh no, this is the song that's going to define us. Some song that we recorded at the very end of our album. It's like, that's crazy. Like what does that mean for you as a creative person? So yeah,
I think that's really cool, and I think there's a great lesson there that you just have whatever your creative endeavor is, whether it's freelance journalism or music or painting or whatever, you just have to keep showing up and showing up and do a lot of bad work, and eventually it's going to get good, and then maybe something will be great. Who knows? But just like, the showrunner for Rick and Morty like has a song from this band that's had a 20-year body of work, and suddenly it's like, who are these guys? They're a 20-year they're an overnight success, but the fact is they've been showing up for 2 decades.
Right. Yeah, I always think there's this Neil Brennan, who was famously, he was kind of Dave Chappelle's creative partner. They did
Mm-hmm.
Half Baked together. They did the Chappelle Show together, and after Chappelle Show ended, he had this podcast for a while called The Champs. I just remember he had this line. He was like, he was interviewing someone, and he was talking about like kind of life after the Chappelle Show, and like kind of like a little bit of the shine of him had kind of fallen off because he wasn't working with Dave Chappelle anymore because Dave Chappelle wasn't doing anything. And he was like, motherfuckers, I might get hot again. Like, don't, like, don't treat me like I'm a nobody, because you never know who's going to get hot again. You never know, like, someone's going to want to be interested in you. I mean, I'll see on Twitter or whatever that some 28-year-old writer saying, like, I'm so old. And I'm like, if you're into this and you want to do this, like, it's a long run, like we're going to, if if any of us ever get to retire, like you're still a long way away from that. And not every good journalist eventually gets a job as a TV writer for a show on Hulu. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't, if you want to do this, like you got to just keep doing it and you got to keep going. Like, and even if you do get that show on Hulu, like that show's going to get canceled, and the job on Hulu doesn't pay nearly as much as you think it does, so it's a long road, I guess is the point. And like what you've got is your ideas and your work ethic and your ability to turn in good copy and have a perspective, I guess is I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah. And let me ask you one more thing. Well, two more things. One's more of a where to find you question, and the other, but the sort of the last real meaty question, if anything, is at the end of your piece on Jenny Odell, you guys, well, you elected to just sit on a bench in silence for 15 minutes with her.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of take us to that scene. What was that like? What inspired that? And just kind of what was that experience like? Sitting there doing nothing.
Well, I will admit that I had the idea before in the article, I meet up with Jenny Odell in the hills of Oakland, California, which is where I'm from. So it was really near my house, or the house I grew up in, I should say. And so yeah, we went on a hike for like an hour, and we kind of talked and hiked at the same time, which I had never done before anyway, which was, I don't know if it's kind of a trope in celebrity profiles in Los Angeles where you go on a hike in a Griffith Park with someone, but I had never done that before. And it's tough to hike and interview someone at the same time, but it was a challenge I was willing to do. And so it went all right. We went for a while and kind of looked at different stuff. There's, as I said, there's in the article, there's these kind of labyrinths on this hike that we checked out. But yeah, so we had talked for a while, and then there was a bench, and so we sat it down at this bench, and we kind of talked for probably about 20 more minutes, and then, as I said, I'd asked her all things I want to ask her, and I said, well, I had thought of this idea before we went out. Just like I've never, the title of her book is How to Do Nothing, and it's about kind of appreciating what's around you and kind of taking it all in. So I said, like, do you want to just sit here and do nothing? And she was like, yeah. I think that's who type of person she is. She didn't seem to think it was weird or awkward. And, I thought it would be interesting to kind of circumvent this usual idea of interviews where you're just kind of pumping people you've just met for all sorts of informations and realities about their lives and thoughts and, inner feelings. So, yeah, we sat there for a while, and it was cool. Like it was great. It was great to just sit there. And, we didn't put like a timer on it. We were just like, I was just like, I'm going to sit around and do this until it feels like it's time to stop. And, there's like at one point, I think like a bird flew pretty close to us, and I looked at her and like, I laughed and she laughed. And then I was like, okay, I think we've done enough nothing. I mean, she could have probably sat there for 2 hours, but I don't know if I was quite up to that quite yet. But yeah, it was a great experience to just sit there with someone and not have anything to, not force them to do anything and not force them to, And then actually, as we walked back at the end of the hike, we had more good conversation. I think it was a kind of a good experience to share.
Cool. Very nice. Well,
Yeah.
well, Eric, where can people, I know you're trying to pull back a little bit, but where can people find you online and get more familiar with your work?
Yeah, I mean, I still have a Twitter account, and it's just my name, Eric Ducker, EricDucker. I post most of my stories up there. Maybe someday I'll get back to putting jokes or weird thoughts on there. And if you want to read any of my articles, I just set up a Contently site. So it's just my name again, ericducker.contently.com.
Fantastic.
Is it Contently? Is it Contently or?
My instinct is Contently.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's probably Contently, but I like the idea of Contently.com.
Right. Okay. I love it. Well, Eric, thanks so much for carving out some time. Some great tips in there, right? That was awesome. I mean, they always are. I mean, am I going to say in this outro after that, be like, that really wasn't that great. Eric sucked. I'm sorry you had to listen to it. No, of course, it was awesome. And he's a great guy, a great writer. Honored to have him on the CNF team. We've got a great bench. Go check out the backlog. It's a bit overwhelming. There's a lot of great episodes. So see someone you like. Just start. Just do it. Do it, man. Thanks to Goucher's MFA in Nonfiction and Baypath's MFA in Creative Nonfiction for supporting the show. And thanks to you, loyal listener. I make this for you, and I hope it helps you in your CNF journey. Remember to consider leaving a review for the show on Apple Podcasts. I will personally coach up a piece of your writing of up to 2,000 words. If you do, leave a review, wait till it publishes, take a screenshot of it, send me the screenshot, and I'll reach out. And it better be a new one because I know all the ones that are published, so don't get sneaky. I'm sorry. That's very cynical and mean of me to even say that. But trust me, I will know. I think that's it. Remember, if you can't do, interview. See ya!